Okay, folks, today we're going to talk about how to make some big boys. These are made, as many of you have figured out, from combining together a couple of torsos and a couple of sets of legs. I'm going to show you guys sandpapering, what kind of cutting tools I use, and my suggestions on how to do this, and then, do what you got to do. So, let's start with sandpaper. A lot of people ask me about the sandpaper. You need several different kinds of grits, and remember, you're working with plastic, not wood. So, when you're talking about shaping, you want something between 1,000 and 1,200. Shaping, when I say shaping, what I mean is, if I need to, right now he's polished smooth, right? If I need to shape something, if I need to change it incrementally, only take away, gosh, I don't know, a millimeter at a time, I can start with 1,200. 1,200 is going to take it pretty quickly, though. It's the strongest grit that I have here. I also use 2,500 and 3,000 a lot of times for cleaning up shaping, like if I want to round things off without taking away too much. And then finally, when a lot of people ask me, how do you get these things so shiny and buffed and polished? And that is 5,000 and 7,000 grit, and that's how you get this nice shine where you almost can't see the seams. And that's where you want 5,000 grit sandpaper, 7,000 grit, different kinds of, this one, for whatever reason, like this brand gets an even higher shine. It's this TLCC. I'll be honest, I don't know any of these brands. Please don't ask me the brands. Just go on Amazon and look for like 1,000 to 7,000 grit sandpaper. It's for plastics or metals, okay? All right, so I'm gonna stop here and now we're gonna get into cutting. Okay, for cutting, I mainly use one tool, an X-Acto knife. I've seen people using Dremels and stuff. Again, whatever works for you, but I prefer the precision of an X-Acto knife. It also gives me a lot more control. I use this flat-tipped X-Acto knife for a reason, and I'm gonna show you why, because I think that this is the tool you need to use. The flat, square, chisel-tipped X-Acto knife. It has this nice, clean, straight edge. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Before I get into the cutting, I wanna point out what actually is happening here. Now you can see when I show it against the light, these are 3 different torso sections cut and glued together, okay? So there's a dark blue torso and then 2 black torsos. They're not the same torso, because if I had cut one torso in half, I might not have gotten the exact cut. So these are 2 different black torsos. Obviously, on the back, some of the jank starts to show. I obviously didn't really care so much about getting the back sanded, and obviously when you're doing this 3-color thing, the back is going to show the same as the front. There's no way around that, okay? And you can't, and also obviously not using printing, and I'll show you why when I get to the sanding. Same thing with the legs, we're gonna get into that, but with the legs, you're going to need to cut at least 2 pairs of legs, and I'll show you how that works. All right, let's say that I want to take, I have a bunch of these dark blue torsos that I had for a project that I never followed, well, I don't want to say I never followed through on it, but I didn't do it for a number of reasons. So now I have a bunch of these blanks, which is really useful. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you how I did Will Sasso, not so much how I did Huel, but it's the same basic idea. But Huel, I used 3 torsos to get the color difference. For Will Sasso's guy, I only used 2. And again, you can see if you look carefully where the seam is, like you can see that we're exactly where I put them together. Because I did them a little bit differently, the way that you attach the head might be different depending on circumstances. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the neck so that I just have a head, and then I'm going to cut these right down the middle. So I like to take the arms off. I think that just gets them out of the way. When I'm cutting, I'm holding it flat down. I'm putting the flat edge of the X-Acto knife against it, and I'm literally just pushing down. And this is what I suggest you do, because what it does is it gives you this very precise cut. And it might not always be perfect, but it's so much easier to clean. You can see I barely scratched anything else. So I'll do that with both of these. Again, I think taking the arms off is smart, especially because you're going to be doing sanding and stuff, and you don't want to accidentally sand the arms, and then you got to work on that. So again, I'm not applying a ton of pressure, a little bit of back and forth, and off she goes. Now don't get rid of these, because you might need them depending on which direction you want to go with this. Now, like I said, I'm going to show you how to do the Will Sasso version, which is to say putting 2 torsos together to make 1. But what I did for Huel is I simply did not cut off that peg, and I cut it on either side as straight down as I possibly could. Now this is where probably a lot of you would be having a little bit of like a panic attack, like, oh shit, I gotta cut this thing in half. Okay, first of all, buy a bunch of these. Like, don't do this with something you feel precious about, because you're gonna mess it up the first time. Notice that I'm aligning it. You don't have to do this. This is just a way that I can make sure. Now, I'm most definitely gonna screw this up because I'm doing it with the camera in front of my head, which I don't normally do. And I'm probably blocking the light up a little bit, but please notice that I'm going back and forth. I'm applying even pressure pretty gently. And I have a nice good seam there, so I'll rest it. And then again, I'm really applying pressure from the top. And obviously be careful. It's an X-Acto knife. You don't want to cut your fingers off. Now you can see, that's not a perfect cut, right? But that's okay, because that's where the sandpaper is going to come in. And I also occasionally do a little bit of stuff like this, where I'm going in and very gently just trimming it away. And you can see that already made a big difference. So I'll do that again with this one. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna do this one off camera, and then I'll show you the result. Okay, so now I have two halves, and I deliberately am gonna leave these a little janky looking so I can show you that it's not gonna be perfect after the first cut. See how this one is a little bit too, curved inward, and this one is almost the opposite, but they're not quite aligned. And if I were to even smush them together, you can see they're not straight. So this is where sandpapering comes in. And this is where you need to be really careful with the grits, because you can see you're only gonna take away a very small amount in order to make these straight. Because I'm trying to clean this up, I'm gonna start with 1200. Again, I've mentioned that 1200 really digs into this stuff. Like, it'll take away fast, so you don't need a lot of rubs. I'm laying it flat, pressing it evenly. 1, 2, 3. Take a look at it. Check it against the other guy. Already a little better, see? See how it's already a little straighter? We could even probably do one more. I'll do 1, 2, 3. Dust it off a little bit. Remember, you will get dust, so, just be aware of that. Already a major improvement, right? So we're gonna do the same thing with the other side. 1, 2, 3. And I'm making little kind of, I'm applying slightly more pressure, say on the bottom part than the top part as I'm doing that, just so that I can get this evenness. And again, it's not necessarily going to be perfect, but it's about getting it to a point where your eye can't really detect any issue. Again, I think this just needs a little tiny bit more, so I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure towards the bottom. 2, 3. Let's see if that made this work. Okay, I think we're getting there. So again, notice it is not a perfectly down the middle cut, but it works because it sells. Now, I could probably, again, this is where I'll probably do this off camera, but I could fix that just a little bit and even it out, and I'm gonna do that now. All right, after a little bit of sanding, I've got them to a place where I'm pretty happy. Now, you're probably thinking, noticing, yeah, again, it looks a little jank. There's the sandpaper lines are not quite even. That's fine. We're gonna fix that in just a second. So now it's time to glue. Now, this is a clever little trick that I figured out with Scotch tape that I'm actually pretty proud of. All right, so check this out. So I'm gonna put these guys down on Scotch tape. First one, just place it down. And then I'm putting the other one right next to it. I'm talking touching, like I would want them to be when they are glued together. Now, I have this awesome little wedge book thing that I can basically open up, glue, close, and they'll be exactly where I want them to be. See? So, now I'm gonna put some glue here. Now the nice thing is, if you use a decent super glue, hold on. So like I was saying, if you use a good super glue, you only need a little tiny bit. I use Loctite, and I'm just putting a little bit. Don't need a ton, but I do want to get it all the way around. And don't worry about a little spillover, because you're gonna sand all that off. So you are closing it up. Watch your fingers. I almost always get glue all over myself. And then you're literally just closing that guy up like a book and then sticking it together. Let the tape hold, let the tape do its job. Again, sorry if I'm doing all of this off camera. Now you'll see it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect because the sanding and the gluing that comes a little later is going to hide some of these crimes. Okay, so again, it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect because we're gonna even it out a little bit. Each of these is unique. Every time I make them, they're a little bit different. Some are wider than others. They're not exactly 3 studs wide. It's gonna take trial and error to get them to be even, but you get better at it. So now I just need to let this dry. So I'd say give it at least 5 minutes and then we can move on to the next step. So after it dries, you're gonna end up with something like this. A little ugly, a little uneven, but it doesn't matter because we're gonna fix all that. So you can flatten this out with sandpaper. You can flatten that out with sandpaper. Be careful, take away too much and you're really gonna mess up the shape, and you also run the risk of just making it, completely unfunctional, non-functional rather, I should say. So I'm gonna sand this down with 1200 to start until I can get this more or less even, and then that's when I go back with the higher grit sandpapers. Again, when you're doing flat sanding, I don't even do it on the cutting board because this cutting board has a bunch of little divots and cuts in it from being used. So I'm gonna go and do this somewhere else and bring it back, but I'm laying it on the flattest surface that I can find. I even sometimes do it against like a flat wall that I have. It's like basically linoleum, so that I don't have to, I can do it vertically, but I'm just going back and forth. Again, flat, even pressure. So I'm gonna do this off camera and then show you. So already you can see it's like magic. Like, look at that. That was the side that was, covered in glue. Again, this one's not sanded with 1200 grit sandpaper for just a moment, maybe 20 good back and forths, maybe less. So you can really see how quickly you can clean up that line, and then it's like, you can barely see it, okay? So this is what I mean by trial and error. Things are not always perfect. Every single time I've done this, I've pretty much ended up with a good side and a bad side, and I've had to turn the good side into the front and then a not so good side into the back. These kinds of little white spots that you're getting, they're maybe not even glue a lot of the time. They're actually the plastic itself being deformed. You may have noticed this if you've ever accidentally crunched one of these things, the way that the plastic can get real light. Again, I think it depends on the color. I think it depends on the original piece. I might not be able to buff this out. So I'm gonna really just focus on the front, and I'm gonna try not to get too annoyed about these little bits, though I think I might be able to fix them a bit with some more sanding. So now I'm gonna sand the bottom here and the top to try to make them a bit more even. Again, using 1200, trying not to overdo it. Okay, so after some off-camera sanding and nearly sanding off the tip of my finger, I got something I'm pretty happy with. We can see much more even now. Doesn't have to be perfect. Another thing that I always suggest, and I'm gonna go do this now, is every time you sand, get the piece a little bit wet and rub it off. I'm talking about, it can just be a little tab of spit, honestly, a drop of water. Just something enough to get it wet. You'd be surprised how much dust and stuff just gets embedded in these little tiny itty bitty grooves, and it comes off with just a quick wash of water. So let me just go put some water on it, and then I'll show you how even after 1200 it looks pretty good. Okay, so 1200 in a t-shirt buff, and already much better. Again, I'm not going to worry about this too much, and this is why I say, it's trial and error. I'm not I'm not making these things perfectly every time. Nobody is. So, and this is where, for example, at the end of the day, if I couldn't get rid of this and that, that's what Photoshop is for. Take it away. Just 2 little freckles, little dots. But I'm pretty happy with this. Now the tricky part is reattaching the head. Okay. Now I'm just going to super glue this in place, and obviously precision matters, because if you do this a little off center, then your guy's head's going to be a little off center and it's going to look janky. Again, for Huel, I did this with 3 pieces. So essentially, Huel's head is 1 dark blue piece that I cut on either side of the peg, and then I attached these 2 pieces, which I would have had to have cut down a little thinner. So you can see, think of it this way, that little rectangular hole is the middle of the original peg, so that's where I had to make the cut. Now that's what I did for Huel. For Will, right down the middle, right? Which is what we have here. Basically the same thing. And again, you can see they're not exactly the same size, but they're very close, because I'm more or less using the head cut as the model. So you can see even when the head is on, once you can sand away some of this too. Once the head is on, you really can't tell. This is glued on. And I mean, you get a little bit of glue residue, but I'm very happy with it. And honestly, after a little bit of cutting away some excess glue, I mean, his head goes down almost entirely flush, which is pretty sweet. So for this part, glue is important. I'm gonna try to do this with the camera. Now, if this gets screwed up, blame the fact that I'm recording this, okay, and not my talent or ability, because my ego can't take it. Actually, whoa, see, I almost did something stupid. Before I do this, I should actually sand this down just a little bit more and try to get rid of some of that, like this light blue business. So I'm gonna do that. Okay. After doing that for about 3 minutes and not making much progress, I decided this is a tutorial and I don't really care. However, if you do get these light plastic bits, honestly, the best way you're gonna have to deal with them is probably the X-Acto knife, and it's literally just a matter of shaving it away. It's what happens when the plastic bends, which is something that anybody who's played with these toys long enough knows. You know, if you bend Lego, you're gonna get this light colored, you know, you bend black, you're gonna get a light colored black, like gray, like blue, you know, whatever it is. So not a whole lot to be done about that. But it can be scraped off, but I don't have the patience to deal with it right now, if I'm being honest. And I wanna focus on this part. So while I got my ADD in check, let's go and put a drop here. One drop, don't overdo it. It spreads, it flattens out. Now, this is the moment of truth. I breathe deep. I don't turn it sideways. Sorry, you might not be able to see this, but I have to do it the right way. Remember, super glue sets fast, so don't spend too much time thinking about what you're doing. Just try to make it right. All right, already not super happy with this. Doesn't feel super straight. Oh, I think I got it. Yeah, that looks all right. It looks all right. Maybe a little bit to the left. And you really got to be careful with super glue, because man, it is not your friend once it sets. So little things I'm noticing is, like, I feel like this head might just be slightly cocked to one side, but that's more or less it. And again, you really let this dry. Don't get overzealous and be like, oh, I'm gonna pop a head on now. Your head will never move ever again. Let it dry completely, give it a half an hour. I'm going to use this opportunity to point out that, again, this is not going to be perfect every time. I'm still going to be going back in and buffing this. Again, this is only a 1200. I'm going to go back over it with 3000 and then 5000 and possibly even 7000. That'll also help me get rid of this little divot here, and will hopefully unify the whole thing. So we're going to let this dry. Meanwhile, just want to point out something, because we still haven't done the legs yet. You don't want to mess with these pegs on the bottom. This one, or the peg holes, I should say. This and this are still going to have to be utilized. Don't worry so much about the middle, but these two on the end, we don't want any glue in there, we don't want any stuff in there, no blue putty, no tack, nothing that's going to mess around with it. Same thing with the arms. The arms are going to reattach, so don't play around with that. So, you go ahead and dry, and we'll get back to this in a minute. All right, while the head, neck area dries, let's talk about how we make these legs. All right, you're gonna need 2 sets of legs. They're both gonna get messed up, so just, you know, be prepared for that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the peg off of this set of legs, okay? So this is gonna end up being the right leg facing you on my left. So I'm going to start by cutting off this one, same way that I did with the neck. So putting it flat, applying pressure straight down, right off. Now that you don't need to save, you're not gonna need, and you don't have to worry about sanding. That just needs to be flat. This leg, you're going to take off, which you could do beforehand if you want, okay? You're gonna take it off, you're gonna find the point where the hip ends and the straight part of the leg begins, and you're gonna cut that right down the middle, flat, flush, as even as you can. Try not to cut inward, try to cut downward. Again, that was pretty straight, you won't need that. Stick this over here. Now, when you put it back on, what you're gonna end up doing basically is you're gonna end up kind of folding this back like this. That'll do 2 things. That'll get it out of the way, and that'll also give it this rounded sort of in-between leg crotch area that is going to help sell the fact that there's a gap in between the 2 legs. Now, this will end up going right here, but we're not gonna glue it or attach it yet, though ultimately that is how I'm gonna do it. You'll see that this is far too thick, and there's not enough space for another leg to fit over there. So this is gonna have to be cut and sanded down slightly, and that's the tricky part. Then what you're gonna end up doing is you're gonna end up having just the right leg on this side. And the way you do that is essentially the same thing. You're cutting again. So let me think about how I did this the last time. Okay, so I'm gonna take this leg off, set this aside. Again, I don't really need this, so I can put that aside. And I'm basically gonna cut off the little leg peg, and then I'm gonna cut this guy in half. So little leg peg first. Again, I just cut off that the little bit, this little guy, right? I wanna make that more flush. There we go, completely flush now, right? And then I'm basically, to make it as straight as possible, I'm putting it upside down, and I'm gonna push flat down again. Here we go. Okay. Now, what I've ended up with is a leg that looks like this and a leg that looks like this. Again, they're not going to connect just yet because this is not perfectly flush and this needs to be sanded down and cut down. But what you're going to end up with is something like this. This will go in here. So the trick is cutting this middle bit down. Again, if you look at, say, Will, you'll see how much smaller that middle bit is, and you'll also see where the seam is between where the two legs go together. Now, this is not easy. Take your time. I would suggest you lay it flat on its back. You use the other leg to hold it still. And remember, you only want to take a little tiny bit away. You kind of can't fuck this up, because if you do it, if you mess it up and you don't get it and you cut away too much, you're going to end up just having to do this whole bit again. Like even just then I kind of screwed it up. You see, I sort of warped it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to straighten this out a little and save it. And if not, unfortunately I may have to do another one. And again, this is why I suggest you always have spare parts for these kinds of projects, because nothing is more frustrating than setting aside time to do this and then being like, oh, well, I screwed up the one pair of black legs that I had, so now I'm done. So already, again, a little jank, but let's see how the sizing is. I think that's going to be more or less pretty close. All right, that is pretty close. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the 1200 and I'm going to sand both of these pieces down gradually until this just slides right in. Okay, getting closer. Still not perfect. Again, this should not, we don't need to do that. So this it ends up has to go down significantly more, probably another couple millimeters. So I'm going to cut this and try this again. Okay, getting closer, still not there. I do not want to keep sanding this part because I need that interior hip piece to be even with that interior hip piece, at least more or less, to sell the gist. So I can only sand this side. So I'm going to keep going, but I'm really close. Okay, after a lot of trial and error, I got it. So notice, sand it as flat as I can possibly make it clean. Now I'm going to put this in here. Watch this. If I did it right, it should slide in with very little issue. You'll see there's a slight gap there. We're going to close that gap when we glue this whole thing together. And yes, I do glue the legs on because it might as well be all one piece, and it'll also help when you're cleaning and unifying everything with sanding in a minute. So I'm going to end up putting glue here, here, and just a tiny bit in between the legs to close the gap. So just a little tiny bit. Again, it's super glue. A little goes a long way. Now when you put the arms back on, this could create, you could get little, you could just get what I just did, where you get a little bit of glue spillover, in which case you may have to sand that off. Try to catch that before it really gets anywhere. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. Just a little touch. I'm going to try to get this more on the inside so it doesn't run. Okay, so inside of the leg. And then actually before I put this on, I'm just going to put a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. Oh, shoot. Right there. Be careful. This stuff is a pain. Okay, holding still. Sorry if all of this is off of camera, but I'm trying over here. Goodness gracious, what did I do? I'll be honest, I probably put too much glue on. That's what I mean by like a little bit really goes a long way. All right, so because I kind of overdid the glue a tiny bit, I'm gonna have a little bit of a spill over here. I'm going to go ahead and rub that with my finger, which is going to spread it a little bit, but I'm gonna be able to clean up a lot of that with sanding. So even though there's like now some like glue residue on this thing, it should be good to go. And that's that. Now that is more or less it as far as construction is concerned. Now it's attached. So again, what you end up with is in the back, it's gonna be janky. right? You're never going to be able to fix that. If anybody comes up with a solution for that, more power to you. But I don't think there is one. And I wouldn't worry about it too much because this is, in my case, these are for photography and display purposes. So if the front looks okay, I'm pretty chill. This also leads into why this is not pad printed, or not printed at all. Obviously, I have to sand anything off. I would love to maybe one day get something like this printed, but I think the biggest issue would be that they are not uniformly sized. And usually when you do printing, everything needs to be the exact same size so that you know, for obvious reasons. So I don't think you're ever going to see a printed one of these, but that would be a goal of mine down the line. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to really go in and just clean this up. As far as taking care of excess super glue, just remember super glue is something that goes, it's on top of the Lego, right? Like it's not embedded into it. So you can sand it off within reason. Just, you know, gentle is the way, you know. A little bit goes a long way when it comes to sanding. And if you sand too hard, you're going to mess up your plastic and you know, ruin all your hard work. So what I'm going to do now is off camera, I'm going to do a little bit of sanding to try to clean up some of these adhesive lines and unify this a little bit. Okay, so after going over it with 2500 grit and a little water and just using a bit of the X-Acto knife to scrape, I got rid of a lot of the residue. It's not perfect, but you know, with a little bit more time, I will be able to clean it up. So see there where the light is catching, you know, like these like indents here where it's not 100% uniform. I can still fix that with sandpaper. It's just gonna take more sandpapering than I've done so far. But already you can see that I've gotten rid of more or less all the, you know, you're getting some imperfections. You get this sometimes if you've rounded the corners a little bit more than the interior. Do not skip grits when you're sanding, you know, yeah, like if you're gonna do 1,000 to shape, then do 2,500 or then do 3,000 and then do 5,000. Don't skip more than like 1,000 or 2,000 grits. 2,000 is fine, you can skip 2,000. So like 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 should do the trick. 5,000 to 7,000 being the last. I sometimes do 7,000 just because I think it's like a real shine. Again, you can see like, you know, that's not great, but we can fix that with sandpaper. So I'm gonna do one more round of sanding. Oh, that head does not look straight from that angle, does it? I'm gonna do a little bit more sanding and I'm gonna cut away some of this excess glue here and then we should be able to put this guy back together. Okay, so after about 5,000 grit sandpapering, some t-shirt buffing and a little bit other odds and ends, I'm pretty happy with it. Again, each of these is different. I could probably work on this for another hour and just keep, you know, changing things, trying to get everything to be 100% even. There's still some issues here, but this can all be done, you know. If the flat sanding is not working for you, take the paper and just rub it in with your thumb, you know, like really take your time, be even, apply even pressure, and it'll all buff out in the end. Now at this point, I actually ended up not taking away anything here, but let's go ahead and put this back together and see how it looks. So arms should go back on as normal. Be aware that because there's still some super glue drying in there, you may end up with some kind of that like kind of oxidized super glue stuff on the inside of the arms, but they'll still be able to move. So already, I do admit I never get tired of seeing these things. That's hilarious. All right, let's find a head for this guy. And let's see. How does abject terror sound to everybody? All right, so let's put this on. All right, now, the only thing that I would need to fix at this point is because of the amount of glue that I put on, I definitely want to make the head more flush. I can push it down though. Actually, it's not too bad. You can see it's almost perfect. So the only thing I would do to fix that at this point is I would go in and I might just use the flat, and this is why I like these. I'm just very carefully, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm very carefully scraping away any excess. Just getting rid of it, giving the head, because remember, it can't go all the way down if it's got all this goop here. And I could go back in and sand this, but I'm not gonna worry about it too much right now. Just wanna show you guys the gist of it. If you are going to try to sand this to kind of get rid of any weird little scratches or anything you see that might bug you, use a very high grit sandpaper to do this part, like 7,000 or 5,000, because otherwise you're going to change the shape of this whole neck area and then it's not going to look right. Remember, anything below 3,000 is really going to show. And there you go. That's pretty good. I mean, again, I am pretty detail oriented and nitpicky, so I might go back in and fix that. But yeah, So here's our new guy, Big Tony. That's the name I've arbitrarily given him. And there we go. Let's keep the orientation. This is Big Tony. And I made him the same way that I made these two guys right here. Sorry, Will. Oh, sorry, brother. And Huel. Again, each one is unique. I could make these a dozen times and they may end up being completely different every single time. They are more or less 3 studs wide. They're not perfectly 3 studs because this middle in-between bit is not. And also things happen like, because of the way the legs are attached, like they might not be 110% flat. But it does the trick. I hope you guys enjoy this. Feel free to leave questions in the comments. And thank you for taking a look. Enjoy.